Bien, bonjour bienvenue à cette rencontre SACRe. Donc je rappelle rapidement que ces rencontres ont été mises en place depuis l'année dernière. Il s'agit régulièrement de proposer aux doctorants, docteurs, chercheurs du laboratoire SACRe, mais pas seulement, c'est quelque chose qui s'est ouvert plus largement, des rencontres régulières avec des artistes ou des chercheurs ou des artistes-chercheurs qui travaillent autour de la recherche-création dans les différents domaines qui sont recouverts par le laboratoire et le programme doctoral SACRe. Nous avons eu, il y a 15 jours, une première rencontre, à titre d'exemple, avec un chercheur, l'historien des sciences Simon Schaffer, qui était notre invité, ainsi que celui du programme d'histoire transnationale de l'ENS. Et on aura une prochaine rencontre, si vous voulez la noter, le 25 novembre, avec deux artistes qui sont aussi des chercheurs, qui sont les artistes franco-libanais Johanna Hadji Thomas et Khalel Jorej, qui ont toute une œuvre importante qui est en grande partie centrée sur le cinéma, la vidéo, la photographie, mais aussi l'histoire et des installations, et qui regardent assez régulièrement ce qu'on peut appeler la recherche-création. Donc ça, c'est le 25 novembre, ça aura lieu à 14h à l'ENS, dans la salle du SAN. Et puis d'autres rencontres seront proposées au cours de l'année 23, à partir de janvier. Il y aura encore 3 ou 4 rencontres pour cette année 22-23. Voilà, donc aujourd'hui, je suis vraiment ravi de recevoir avec Barbara, notre invité, Marcus Lindeen, qui vient donc pour le festival d'automne et qui a accepté de venir à cette rencontre. Barbara, je te laisse la parole.
Merci Antoine, bienvenue à tous. Je vais présenter nos deux intervenants, enfin notre invité et Viviana Chiotini qui va participer avec moi à la modération. Et puis ensuite je laisserai la parole à Marcus pour quelques moments de présentation de son travail, parce que peut-être que vous ne le connaissez pas tous, même on est certains dans la salle à avoir vu la pièce Orlando et Michael hier au théâtre de Gennevilliers. Juste un mot sur la langue de notre échange également. On va un peu alterner entre l'anglais et le français. Marcus va s'exprimer en anglais. Moi, je peux traduire si besoin. Je ne sais pas si vous comprenez tous l'anglais ou si il y a besoin d'une traduction que je peux faire sous forme résumée si besoin. Est-ce que quelqu'un a besoin d'une traduction? N'hésitez pas. Ou ça ira? Ok, bon, en tout cas, n'hésitez pas à lever la main si besoin. Voilà, donc Marcus Lindeen, merci d'être avec nous. Vous êtes auteur, réalisateur, metteur en scène suédois, mais basé à Paris. Vous avez une formation en mise en scène de théâtre à l'Académie suédoise d'art dramatique, et vous avez également été journaliste pour la radio en Suède. Ensuite, vous avez commencé un travail théâtral et dans le champ du cinéma documentaire en 2006 avec un coup double qui est un film documentaire qui s'appelait Regretters et une forme théâtrale. Et depuis ses débuts, vous avez réalisé 4 films et 7 pièces de théâtre. Et donc, vous présentez actuellement la trilogie des identités, donc 3 pièces au théâtre de Gennevilliers dans le cadre du Festival d'automne à Paris. Donc c'est un travail qui traite des révolutions intimes, des questions de genre, du rapport au spectateur, du rêve, des représentations de soi, qui sont des thèmes très fréquemment abordés dans votre travail. Vous êtes artiste associé au Piccolo Teatro de Milan et à la Comédie de Caen au CDN de Normandie, avec votre collaboratrice, dramaturge Marianne Segol-Samois, avec qui vous avez une compagnie de théâtre qui s'intitule Wild Minds. voilà, nous, c'était très intéressant pour nous de vous inviter en raison de ce travail présenté au Festival d'automne, de ce travail entre théâtre, cinéma, installation, et aussi du fait que vous êtes engagé dans un travail de recherche qui prend la forme d'une thèse de recherche artistique à l'école d'art de Stockholm. Donc c'était un point de rencontre intéressant aussi avec le projet du doctorat SACRe. Je vais introduire brièvement Viviana Chiottini qui va se présenter un peu plus longuement, qui est doctorante du Conservatoire national d'art dramatique en 3e année. Et elle va présenter son sujet de thèse aussi dans quelques temps. Voilà. I will now switch to English to let you first make your presentation, to introduce your work, and then we'll follow with our questions.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I'm happy to be here. It's an honor to be at La Femis, the film school, of course, and also in this context of the research, because it's really kind of similar, from what I understand, to where I am inscribed in Stockholm as a doctoral candidate at the film department of Stockholm University of the Arts. And we are also kind of sharing in between different disciplines, dance and opera and theater and cinema and so on. And I'm doing a research project. I will talk briefly about it in the presentation. I will begin. I will do this in English, and then maybe I will try to see if I can maybe answer some questions or in my French. But yeah, if something is unclear, please don't hesitate to ask. So I am. I started out, as Barbara was also saying, I actually started out as a journalist, as a writer and as a radio journalist in Sweden. And then I felt kind of trapped somehow in the regulations of journalism. And I started to long for fiction somehow, or for more possibilities of manipulating the material. I found that the stories in real life was really fascinating, but I got frustrated sometimes in the editing room at the radio, because the people I had interviewed, I felt they couldn't really perform their story the way that I would have liked them to perform it. So I found myself very forcefully trying to edit it in a way that made me start to long for more freedom, in a sense. So that's when I enrolled as a director student at the Theatre Academy in Stockholm. And since I started working as a theatre director and a writer, I have worked with documentary theatre, with using research and interviews as a basis for my work. And in a way, that the trilogy of plays that I am presenting these weeks in Festival d'Automne is a kind of example of that. And I'm gonna explain that. And I will show some clips also, so that you will see a little bit the different things. So the trilogy of identities consists of 3 plays, and they are all dealing with in a way the same theme, and which is identity. The first play is called Orlando y Mikael, which is actually my very first work that's based on the documentary film Regretters. It's based on an encounter. This is the poster for the film. It's based on an encounter with 2 Swedish men that I brought together in the studio, and they discuss the fact that they both came to regret their sexual reassignment surgeries and becoming women. And now they are questioning this decision, and they want to turn back to become men again. And they are meeting for the first time in the studio and having a conversation about their decision and their experience. And this became both a documentary film, which is still, it's available on Netflix if you want to search for it. It's called Regretters. But it was also turned into a theater play where actors were playing the parts. And it's this work that we are now doing a French version of many years later, because the first work was made in 2006 and the film came in 2010. And now we're doing this French new version in the theater called Orlando and Michael. The second part of the trilogy is a work that is called Wild Minds. It's a work that was commissioned from the Modern Museum in Stockholm in 2015. It's based on interviews that I've made with maladaptive daydreamers in America. It's a psychological condition where people are daydreaming too much. So they are kind of trapped in their interior fantasy worlds. And so I found them online in a kind of help group for people who are suffering from this condition. In French, I think it's called the rêveur compulsif. So I interviewed them individually, and on stage, it's a very simple kind of disposition. It's just a circle of chairs where audience members are sitting together with performers. And the performers are having the words from the interviews that I made, but it's kind of set into a conversation between 4 people, or 5 in the French version, yeah. So that a conversation that never really happened in real life, but it's all based on the interviews that I made before. And the third part of the of the trilogy is called L'Aventure Invisible. It's made in 2020. It was also performed here in Paris at Théâtre Gennevilliers and at Festival d'Automne, but it has been touring quite a lot in Europe now during the past year. And it's based on 3 interviews that I have made with 3 very different stories. I can just mention them briefly. It's a brain scientist that has a stroke and loses her memories and her identity. There's a video artist that is obsessed by the queer photographer Claude Cahun from the 30s and 40s. And then there is the first man in the world who's actually a French man who went through a full facial transplantation. So he lives with the face of someone else. And those 3 stories are performed by 3 performers in a kind of circular scenography that looks like this, where the audience is, again, this is from a rehearsal, but the audience is sitting together with the performers and listening to a conversation. So it's very simple as a format. All the 3 plays is just basically intimate conversations, and you're sitting, there's no stage, so you're sitting together with the performers and you're listening to the stories. So this is something that I'm doing in the theater. I have been doing in these last 3 plays, is like really trying to understand what can the conversation as a format give for a theatrical experience. But just to mention something about my film work also, I have made 3 feature films or feature documentary films and 2 shorts. And the last film that I made that was released here in France is called The Raft. It was presented in cinemas here in France in 2018. It's about a Mexican scientist that in 1973 crosses the Atlantic Ocean on a raft, and he brings with him 10 people from all over the world representing different gender, religions, and ethnicities to study violence and sex. And in the film, I reunite them in a studio 40 years later, the people who are still alive, to board a reconstruction of the raft and to talk about the experience and what happened back in the 70s. And I thought we could just see a trailer of the film so that you get an idea of how it looks.
All my life, I have wanted to know why people fight and really understand what is going on inside our minds.
The first time I saw the raft, I was excited and a little frightened. We were going to answer questions about what makes people hate each other.
The plan was to cross the Atlantic all the way over to Mexico.
Will an isolated group of people on a raft cooperate to survive? Or will the situation create conflicts and make them fight against each other?
This is like home again. This is the raw data that he's compiled into graphs.
We were the guinea pigs.
We became like a very tight tribe. It was some of the best things that happened to me to let my heart beat for them. It was like we were astronauts being launched into space. How often do you masturbate?
I don't count.
With whom have you had sexual contact?
Many, many.
Everybody. He was a threat. The idea kind of lit like a match. Should we do it? Should we do it? Should we do it? Murder.
So this is just to show you an example a little bit about how I work with documentary material. I use it kind of in a very theatrical way when it comes to cinema. I basically make it take place on a stage in a black studio with a scenography, and I borrow a lot of techniques from fiction filmmaking or from theater actually, to see how you can treat documentary material with those kind of methods. And we could maybe see just an excerpt of L'Aventure Invisible. Also, like there is a short trailer, or we can see maybe a clip from the very first scene in the play, which is just to give you an idea a little bit. So let me see here. This is the very first thing that basically happens in the play.
Non. Je pense pas que ce soit une bonne idée d'être moi-même sur scène.
Ok.
Je préfère pas.
Pourquoi?
Tout d'abord, ça m'est difficile de parler. Depuis la greffe, je peux plus fermer ma bouche correctement. Donc, ça pourrait être compliqué pour le public de me comprendre.
Mais vous seriez d'accord pour que quelqu'un d'autre vous représente sur scène et raconte votre histoire?
Oui.
S'il dit exactement vos mots comme maintenant pendant l'enregistrement?
Oui, oui.
Donc, si vous avez quelqu'un qui vous représente sur scène, vous imagineriez que ça pourrait être qui?
Il faudrait que ce soit quelqu'un de très jeune. Peut-être un jeune acteur ou un étudiant en théâtre ou... je ne sais pas.
Ok, mais vous avez 45 ans là.
Oui, je viens d'avoir 45 ans. Mais mon visage est jeune. Il vient d'un donneur qui est mort à l'âge de 20 ans. Donc je trouve que c'est quelqu'un de cet âge qui devrait me représenter.
So in a way, here it's also an example a little bit about the relationship between reality and what happens on stage. Here it's very clearly communicated for the audience right at the beginning of the play that at least this character is not himself on stage. He's representing someone else, and the person he's representing has actually chosen him in a way, or like someone like him, someone who is young. And I work closely with the... Here is Jérôme Hamon, who's who I'm sure some of you have heard of him. He has been quite a lot in the press in France, as he has been going through 2 facial transplantations, in fact. And he has also published a book about his life and so on. And I interviewed him together with Marianne Segol-Semois, who I work very close with, who's my collaborator and dramaturg. And we interviewed him several times here in Paris, and he also came to rehearsals when we were working to meet the actor who was going to play him on stage, and so on. I can say something. For example, the other, just to give you another example. Now I'm talking a little bit specifically about L'Aventure Invisible because I think maybe it's better to talk about one project and give you a little bit insight into it. One of the other characters is based on this woman, Jill Bolte Taylor. She's an American brain scientist who has published a book that has been reprinted all over the world, and I think she has a TED Talk online that is, I think, the second most viewed TED Talks of all time, which is, I recommend seeing it. It's very powerful, actually. And she has, as a brain scientist, she had a stroke, and obviously, when she was 37, and she were able to kind of experience the obviously happening from the inside of her own brain, and she wrote a book about this, and it was a big journey for her to lose all her memory, her identity, and she worked 8 years of her life to come back to being a person and a brain scientist again. And on stage she's played by an American opera singer who casted for the part, Claren McFadden, and maybe we can watch just an excerpt from that play.
Et les souvenirs de votre vie passée, au bout d'un certain temps, ils ont commencé à revenir?
Non, pas vraiment. Elle m'a montré des albums photos en m'expliquant qui était qui dans la famille, mais je ne reconnaissais personne.
Et quand vous voyez des photos de vous, qu'est-ce que vous ressentiez?
Je pouvais voir que les personnes sur les photos me ressemblaient, mais j'avais aucun lien avec elle. C'était une étrangère. Et ce qui était encore plus étrange, c'est de me voir sur les vidéos.
Ah bon?
Ouais. Parce que j'ai trouvé des cassettes vidéo de conférences et de séminaires, et ça m'a été très utile. J'ai étudié la façon dont je parlais, dont je bougeais, dont je tenais mes mains.
Vous avez regardé des cassettes vidéo pour réapprendre à être vous-même?
Oui. Ou non, peut-être pas pour être moi, mais pour savoir comment agir en tant que moi.
And the third person on stage is actually based on this person, Sarah Pusil, who is a video artist in London and who has dedicated 20 years of her art career to interpret the works of Claude Cahun, who is this surrealist writer and photographer, French, but who lived on the island of Jersey, and who took amazing photos, very androgynous, queer, very ahead of her time, and that people in that moment didn't really see. It was first after her death that it was discovered. And I wanted to do something about Claude Cahun, but I didn't know exactly how to approach Claude Cahun. I didn't want anyone to play Claude Cahun on stage. So I tried to search for another entry point, and I found this artist in London that had a kind of obsession with Claude Cahun. So I decided to interview her as the basis for one of the characters. And in the end, it's Frankie Gogo, who is a performer here in France, who's interpreting the artist, who is in the end a kind of mix between the words of Sarah Pusil, my words, and also Frankie Gogo's life story. In a sense, the character is kind of mixed between those three sources. I'm going to see if I can find a clip just to see something with the artist.
Regardez.
I just want to say, because during it's very the play consists of conversation between the three, and you listen to those, and at some point there are some photos being displayed on two screens and some films and so on.
Regardez, cette photo c'est 1934 et cet artiste c'était Claude Cahun.
Et qui est Claude Cahun?
C'était une écrivaine et photographe surréaliste qui vivait dans les années 20. Mais bon, elle était trop radicale pour son époque.
Ok.
C'est elle sur la photo?
Ouais. Elle faisait toujours des autoportraits où elle jouait des personnages androgynes, comme celle-là. Regardez-la, ou peu importe en fait.
Ouais, c'est vrai.
Bon, maintenant, c'est plus accepté d'être fluide, queer, de jouer avec les identités, mais à l'époque, ça l'était pas. Pas de cette façon-là.
Ah ouais.
Quand j'ai vu ces photos pour la première fois dans l'expo, je me suis mis à pleurer.
Ah ouais? Pourquoi?
Parce que l'histoire offre pas beaucoup d'exemples de personnes comme moi.
Mais quand vous dites de personnes comme moi, qu'est-ce que vous voulez dire?
En fait, moi, je me suis fait opérer. Je me suis fait retirer la poitrine.
Ok.
Ça a été très important pour moi de le faire. Mais ça ne veut pas du tout dire que j'ai envie d'aller plus loin et de devenir un homme.
Mais c'est pas un peu compliqué d'être entre les deux comme ça?
Non, pas du tout. Parce que c'est comme ça que je me sens bien.
Ok.
C'est ce que j'ai appris avec l'autre cas. En termes de genre, le choix le plus courageux qu'on puisse faire, c'est de ne pas faire de choix.
So and in as I can say, maybe should I continue just for 2 minutes or something, just to say something about the method of script writing, and which is also integrated into the rehearsals. I work with the sound script, so it means that all the actors. This is a method that is called verbatim headphone theater technique. It's several companies that are using this technique in Paris. Emily Rosset is using this technique with, for example, with like oreillettes, like little earpieces that delivers the text both during rehearsals but also during the performance. So the actors are wearing these earpieces, and they in the earpieces they are listening to text. That text could be text from a documentary character that I have recorded, but because I make most of my interviews in English, here in France it's translated, and there's actually professional actors going into a sound studio who make the voices for the ears. So it becomes a kind of like almost like a radio theater session where we make a kind of sound script in a way, and each this is the method I've used for all the 3 plays in the trilogy, and each actor has his own or her own voice. I can demonstrate just quickly like how it works. This is an image from the sound editing software Pro Tools, which is used as a kind of to make the montage of the dialogue. So I would show you just how it sounds in the ears of the performer.
Et pour ce visage-là, c'était qui le donneur?
Un jeune garçon de Nantes. Il avait seulement 20 ans.
Il est mort comment? Je sais pas, et je veux pas savoir.
Je sais seulement que ça a été une mort soudaine et inattendue.
Mais le fait d'avoir les cellules de quelqu'un d'autre et les vôtres qui se rencontrent, ça vous dérange? Ou ça vous a déjà fait vous sentir étranger à vous-même? Non, j'y pense pas comme ça.
Et pour ce visage-là, c'était qui?
Oh, sorry. And I would go directly to just an excerpt from the same scene during one of the performances. So it's a video document.
Et pour ce visage-là, c'était qui le donneur?
Un jeune garçon de Nantes. Il avait seulement 20 ans.
Il est mort comment?
Je sais pas. Et je veux pas savoir. Je sais seulement que ça a été une mort soudaine et inattendue.
Mais le fait d'avoir les cellules de quelqu'un d'autre et les vôtres qui se rencontrent, ça vous dérange? Ou ça vous a déjà fait vous sentir étranger à vous-même?
Non, j'y pense pas comme ça. Mais après ma première greffe, j'ai fait un cauchemar horrible.
And just so it's a little bit confusing maybe because they're not always hearing the same voice in their ear. Sometimes when we when we do the kind of radio play, we do have one dedicated actor for each performer. But when we rework the script during rehearsals, we sometimes change things, and then it might be Marianne, my artistic collaborator, who is reading it and who's I'm rewriting something, she's translating it, and then she will read it with her voice. So in the end, that's why sometimes the actors will hear several voices, but it will come out as one when they talk. So yeah, I will just show you again to read.
Et pour ce visage-là, c'était qui le donneur?
Un jeune garçon de Nantes. Il avait seulement 20 ans.
Il est mort comment? Je sais pas, et je veux pas savoir.
Je sais seulement que ça a été une mort soudaine et inattendue.
So that's, I mean, in a way it's very broken, the sound script in their ears, but the audience will not think about that. And this kind of technique, it creates a dialogue, a form of dialogue that is different from the way a dialogue becomes when you learn the text by heart, and when it's delivered the traditional way, it sometimes has a more authentic vibe to it, and sometimes it's something strange to it, something that is a little bit off or weird. It's just examples of this method. But maybe that could be enough as a presentation, just to show you something of my work, and I'm happy to elaborate with questions and dive back into the material and show you more pictures, clips, and things like this.
Thank you very much. So perhaps Viviana.
Bonjour. Je suis heureuse d'être parmi vous et de participer à cette rencontre avec Marcus Lindeen, je prononce correctement, dont la pratique est remarquable. Et donc voilà, merci Barbara pour cette invitation. Je m'appelle Viviana Chiotini. Voilà, je me présente un peu. Je suis scénographe et metteuse en scène. Et je suis d'origine hellénique. Enfin, je viens d'Athènes, de Grèce. J'ai fait des études en architecture à Paris et puis de scénographie à Londres. Et donc, l'espace, la relation du corps avec l'espace, le lieu, la composition, influence beaucoup la manière dont je pense le théâtre et la manière dont je pratique aussi la mise en scène et aussi la manière dont je comprends le cinéma. Je suis doctorante SACRe en 3e année, affiliée au Conservatoire national supérieur d'art dramatique, où je développe un projet de recherche création, donc de recherche par la pratique, intitulé Dramatisation des relations entre le corps et l'espace, le triptyque dans la performance interdisciplinaire. Ce projet interroge le format triptyque qui est essentiellement développé dans le domaine de beaux-arts. Donc, quand on a une œuvre, par exemple une peinture en 3 panneaux, ça peut être une œuvre sculptée ou même une installation. Donc, une œuvre qui consiste en 3 œuvres. Et moi, j'explore ce format dans le théâtre et la performance. Et pour cela, j'utilise des outils interdisciplinaires. Et en ce moment, je me concentre sur la notion du rythme. Et je cherche un rythme entre 3 performances parallèles, donc à la fois parallèles, simultanées et isolées, entre 3 espaces scéniques qui forment un tout défini par la relation, ou entre 3 corps ou plus qui sont à la fois ensemble et séparés. Voilà, juste un peu sur ma recherche. Et donc, comme j'explore la scénographie comme un champ en expansion, donc la scénographie qui dépasse les conventions du décor du théâtre ou du cinéma. Et je voudrais poser quelques questions par rapport à l'espace dans votre travail et le processus de création de cette scénographie. Donc, dans la trilogie des identités, on retrouve, si je ne me trompe pas, dans les trois, on retrouve une scénographie circulaire et je me demande si cet espace porte un sens. Moi, j'ai pu voir dans le festival d'automne, j'ai vu à Orlando Michael. Et donc, par exemple, ces deux demi-cercles connectés me font penser au thème de la rencontre. Et je me suis dit aussi que quand j'ai vu le spectacle que chaque demi-cercle pourrait symboliser l'homme et la femme, comme tout simplement comme les interprètes sont assis au milieu, donc un peu entre les deux, comme il s'agit de deux hommes qui ont subi comment dire, la réassignation du sexe. Voilà. Et voilà, donc ce dispositif circulaire, ça me fait penser à beaucoup de choses, au mythe de l'androgyne, pardon. Voilà, pour parler juste un peu de ce mythe, pour Aristophane, il y avait trois sortes d'êtres humains. Donc, la femelle, le mâle et l'androgyne, qui est composé de la femelle et du mâle, mais ayant provoqué la colère de Dieu, Dieu a puni les androgynes en les séparant. Et donc, du coup, ce cercle, ces deux demi-cercles unis, ça m'a fait aussi penser à une recherche d'une unité perdue. Voilà, donc ma question est-ce que cette scénographie est basée sur le drame ou est-ce que c'est vraiment le but c'est de créer une relation intime ou de positionner les interprètes à côté des spectateurs, voilà.
I wish it was more thought through, the way that you very beautifully interpreted the scenography in relation to the topic. But actually, the scenography was made specifically for L'Aventure Invisible, the play that I've been talking a little bit about before. And after we had made L'Aventure Invisible, that's when I realized that actually, if I look back, I have three plays that all deal with a similar theme and also share a similar form. So I was having this L'Aventure Invisible in this scenography here, but also this Wild Minds that was presented in a circle of chairs. And so I decided I would like to present also Regretters or a reworking of that material and make it part of the trilogy. And I said, why not use this sonography that we already have? So, the sonography is more built as a kind of platform, I think, for proposing a very intimate form of theater, where you basically take out the plateau, the stage is gone because it's not really used in the spectacle because the performers are sitting together with the audience. And when we were developing the structure together with the scenographer, we were thinking a lot about how to make a very intimate conversation be at the center of the experience without using the traditional audience and the stage. And one of the inspirations that we were trying many different ways. We knew we had three témoignages in a way that we're going to meet in an encounter, but we were trying other formats in the sketch. We were trying these, so we were trying something where the audience was still in the audience seats, but maybe the three performers were maybe turning on a plate or something that you could see them, but they were talking together. And then we were looking at something called the anatomic theater. I don't know if some of you are familiar with it. It's some kind of thing from hundreds of years ago in the field of medicine and science. There would be a kind of a scientific spectacle, you could say, where people would be invited to assist. It could be how do you say, like a dissection of a body, an autopsy, where a doctor would explain the surgery and showing the body and so on, and the audience would be standing around. And we thought that this was an interesting concept in a way, and also, of course, there is the arena of the ancient Greek theater and so on. So we started to work with that more to find different ways of having the audience sit together with. But it was really, I think it was more pragmatic than linked to the theme when we built it. Yeah.
Merci. Mais en parlant de la scénographie, je voudrais aussi vous poser la question par rapport au film que vous avez fait de The Raft. Là, l'importance, il y a une importance de l'espace principal, qui est principal, je pense, dans le film. Et je voudrais un mot sur ça, et notamment sur la reconstruction du radeau pour la restitution, reenactment des moments vécus avant 40 ans. Est-ce que cet espace a aidé ces personnes, est-ce que ça a aidé leur mémoire? Voilà, je suis curieuse de savoir le retour par rapport au radeau dans le studio, comme c'est l'espace qui est le point commun entre les personnages.
Peut-être on peut dire aussi, maybe we can also add that The Raft was a film and also presented as an installation at Centre Pompidou. So also that's an interesting...
Yeah, right. It was an installation, like an interactive installation, where the same material from this is a shot from when we are building the installation in Pompidou, but it consisted of, you could board the raft as an audience, and you could walk around, and it would contain like headphones. You could listen to testimonies. There were video work in monitors and on screens, and there were objects that you could take part of, and so on. So that's right, the raft became both an art installation and also a film for the cinema. But to say something about the scenography for the raft, I think I have to go back to my first film, which is Regretters, because Regretters was really, in a way, very simply made. It's just shot in a black studio. It's one conversation between these two characters, and it's filmed very simply with 3 cameras. So it's just like nothing is happening in the film. Basically, the only thing that is happening is that they're showing photos of their lives, and they're talking. And I thought that the studio was such an amazing environment, because it was giving me so much freedom. I felt very at home. It reminded me of the theater. So as a filmmaker, it gave me a lot of opportunities, I felt, to control the material. And after that, I wanted to go into the studio again, but see what more could I make in the studio with documentary material. And I decided I wanted to go into the studio with scenography. What can I build that could have a meaning for the participants? And I really searched for stories to match that idea. It was really like a superficial idea from the beginning. I want to make a studio film with documentary material with a scenography. and then started to come this idea that I want to make a reunion of people who had experienced something strong in the past, in their youth, and I started to look at events from the 1970s, political groups and queer communes and different things like before landing at this story with the raft. And when I found the story with the raft, I decided, okay, but this is it. I thought it was a fantastic story, and it had an amazing object. I mean, it was like a scenography already, and the experiment was about understanding what happens in a limited space between people, and so there was almost this kind of theater built into the experiment. So I decided to make a replica of the raft in the Black Studio, and I worked together with a set designer, a Danish set designer, Simone Grau Rooney, who's the set designer of Lars von Trier. So she had a lot of experience of making also films inside the studio environment with him. And she was very key in developing how to make the scenography. In the beginning, I wanted it to make a replica in the same material, colors, that everything would be exact as in the past. But Simone, she thought that when the old people come to the studio, they will just start to look for mistakes, like the windows they weren't like this exactly, and the table weren't really there, and so it's better to propose something that is obviously a sketch, something that is more like a scenography, like an as if. And I think that was a good idea, and we did that. So we made this plywood kind of decor, and I think it functioned as a kind of memory theater in a way. So it helped the participants to remember, I think, so that they could be in different places on the raft to discuss what they had been through. Let me see if I have some. Yeah, I mean, so I could place them in different positions, and when they were, for example, inside, they could remember, oh yes, I slept there and you slept there. So it gave some kind of food for their memories, but also it gave me as a director opportunities to make a richer material in terms of images, in terms of movement, and playing with cinema in a more elaborated way than I had done in the previous film.
Could you perhaps tell us a bit more, as you've just started to do, about your preparatory process in your approach of a topic? How do you find your subject matters, your stories, and how do you research them? What kind of documents do you look for? You mentioned that you were conducting interviews, but also collecting photographs or other types of press clips, etc. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes. So I mean, since I was a journalist at the radio, I have a practice in my work that is about collecting stories, and I have in the beginning when I started with radio and worked with journalism, I had this kind of system to archive clips. So I would read a lot of newspapers, magazines, and I would rip out articles that I thought were interesting, and I would sort them in different subjects. Here the subjects are saying in Swedish, but it says disappearances on the first one, or eternal youth or eternal life on the second one. So it would be themes that maybe would interest me, and I would kind of try to combine things and see if I could make things meet. And I do this all the time, and it's when I'm about to make a new play or a new film, I go back into the archive and I try to search for what have I been curious about before. And just to give you, I can give you some examples of things that I'm trying to look for. This, for example, either it's personal stories, people who have experienced very strong changing things. Here is like a woman who can't feel pain, for example. But if it's like a story, I usually try to find stories that has maybe a very, in a way, sensational quality, something that is very strong and almost larger than life, almost like fiction, but in reality. But I want them to carry, or to be able to carry, something universal that we can all relate to, and not all stories make that match. It's very hard. I'm interested in science. I try to find scientific things, but maybe that has a kind of poetic layer to it, or a more philosophical or existential layer. Or it could also, sometimes I just collect things that are just strange. Here's like a little thing about someone who saw 2 doves on the street who had glued hats on them. So apparently someone had glued some hats on some pigeons on the street. Just these like little small things. Maybe that, this might not be a play, but or it could be like when I go, of course, as a lot of artists do, I think we collect things and we search for inspiration, or there could be photos or art exhibitions that catches my eye that I feel can feed the material. But for example, with L'Aventure Invisible, I had. Do you want me to like really go in more detail? I can, but this is the general. Like I have this as an ongoing practice. But if we take L'Aventure Invisible, for example, the first thing that I was interested in was really the work of Claude Cahun. I had read an article in an American magazine that was like a review of a book that she had written. And that was the first time I heard about Claude Cahun. I didn't know her work. I hadn't seen her photos. This was many, many years ago. And in this review, they mentioned the title, which is the Invisible Adventure, Det osynliga äventyret, or L'Aventure Invisible. And I thought this title was amazing. It sounds like a children's book or something, or at the same time it could be something very profound. And I felt it was so, I got a lot of inspiration from this title, and I felt I want to make a work with this title. That's how sometimes for me it begins, very superficially, with like a form or a title, and then comes, I go back and try to find stories to match that. But I try to, when I get an idea, I try to do a lot of research, find a lot of information, of course, read books and about the topic. In this case, I also went to the island of Jersey where Claude Cahun lived, together with her companion, to visit her grave, to visit the archives, and to try to understand also what could match with the story of Claude Cahun. So I was looking in my archive and seeing what are the other stories there that I had fallen for, and I knew that this picture was in my archive, and I thought it was, sorry if it's a little bit strong image, but it's from a facial transplantation. It's from the National Geographic, this image. And it was about Laurent Lantieri, who's a surgeon here in Paris, who is actually the first surgeon in the world who were able to make a full facial transplantation for Jérôme Mamon, who is his patient. And I thought that this was really fascinating. I thought that this said something interesting about identity. What would it mean to basically wear the face of someone else? Like, how does it affect you?
It's a science fiction subject also.
Yeah.
A number of movies. So
totally. So it has that quality of the fiction, but it's taken from real life, and so this triggers me somehow. And so I searched for a long time to try to find a combination. How can I combine facial transplantation with the theme of Claude Cahun? And it takes a long time, and then in the end I found this third thing with Jill Bolte Taylor and her book and so on, and decided to make this kind of conversation between them. But it takes, I make interviews. So Jill Bolte Taylor, I interviewed her, I think 3 times. And I transcribe all the interviews for hundreds and pages of exact transcriptions of what she says. And then Marianne Segol-Samoa and me, she makes a translation into French. We start to process the text and to make it into conversation with the other two, which is a quite lengthy process. But it's that's some part of the process at least.
Vous avez travaillé avec des personnes réelles, c'est-à-dire des personnes concernées, comme sur The Regretters. Et vous avez aussi travaillé avec des acteurs et aussi avec des interprètes qui ont des points communs, par exemple qui s'identifient comme trans, dans le cas de Orlando et Michael. Donc je me demande, je voudrais un commentaire sur les différences du processus de création et de la direction de ces trois types, si vous voulez, de personnes.
I think that's a good question because, of course, in a way, it's a good example with Regretters because in Regretters, the film, I work with the real people who are actually presenting themselves as themselves. But they're guided by me in the conversation. The conversation is put on stage in a way. It's controlled by me. So I would let them speak freely, but I would also intervene with questions and with asking for retakes and these kind of things. And they would also be hired in the film production as actors of themselves. So I would also have a relationship professionally with them where they are actually not just documentary subjects, they're actually paid as actors to portray themselves in a sense, which I think changes a little bit the relationship between me as a documentary filmmaker or a director and the subjects who, as actors, have another form of agency. All of a sudden they can participate in another way. And but of course, I can also have more freedom with manipulation in a sense. And when we in the play, in the last works I've been doing, I've been trying to work with non-professional actors because I think I'm searching for a kind of non-theatricality on stage, and I have found it more easier to achieve that with people who are not trained as actors. So for Orlando et Michael, the play, the French version of Regretters, here we decided to work with people on stage that themselves have some experience of either being trans themselves or queer somehow, or an experience of androgyny, of being somehow questioning in their own identity and their own bodies the idea of the binary gender scale. And we were working with a casting director who herself is a trans woman, and who were searching within the community in France of community queer, community trans, to find the interpreters or the performers. And we worked for almost 8 months and had castings to find them. So I work very, very detailed, and we've done that also with the other two plays here in France. We've worked very, very hard to get with castings for to find the performers. I don't know, and of course, because they are non-professionals, they don't. It's a utility that I use the sound script as a method because I don't need to work the way I'm in a way trained to work with professional actors, where you work with them learning the text, but also working with psychology and the techniques and in how to interpret the text. Here I can control that with the actors in the headphones, or I can control it in my sound program in a sense. I don't need to ask them to make a pause or to push things. I can change the intonation in the voice that they're hearing, and they can just follow. So they don't need to really they don't need to compose in a sense actively. But of course, when they have been performing several times, the text starts to be kind of incarnated in their bodies also. So it becomes a kind of theatrical work, but from another perspective, it's.
But also, as a spectator, when you are looking at Orlando and Michael, this strangeness and distance from themselves is felt and participates in our reception of the themes of the play. We see that they're repeating what they hear, and they are not fully embodied or fully. They don't fully take on the role. There's a distance, and I think that plays completely into the what is the topic of the play.
Right.
And also, this is a running thread between a number of the plays in the trilogy. This idea of being at a distance from oneself, and you're staging conversations between different persons, but also reflecting on the conversations that we have with ourselves, the sorts of gaps that we experience between the social self and the inner self, between reality and representations. And I think the choice of acting technique plays into that sort of general theme. Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think of course, in this case, you're completely right about that. I think it works. It's not. It has really been a working technique that I've been doing more pragmatically, actually, to just like this. It provides me a palette when I can work, which feels fluent for me, or it feels easy. But you're completely right. Conceptually, it does make sense for the topic of identity, because it has to do with representation, and everyone in the who is on stage or like in the performance, they are actually performing the voice of someone else. So there is like an identity play within the technique of how the theater plays are made. That's exactly right.
Mais aussi entre le thème du voyage intérieur pour trouver son identité et la forme de la conversation. Il y a une conversation. Est-ce que ces deux sont liés? C'est-à-dire, est-ce que sont théoriquement liés pour vous? Est-ce que ce voyage de l'identité, se fait toujours par rapport à la relation avec l'autre?
Yeah, I guess, because I mean that's a way of exploring your inner self is also to me in conversation with others. And I think what I'm trying to achieve in these conversations on stage, which are not necessarily documentary conversations, except for Orlando and Mikael, who actually did meet in real life, but for the other plays they never met. So the conversation is kind of fictional. It's a kind of dream conversation that I wish that maybe would have existed in real life, and maybe represents a kind of conversation that I lack in the real life, where I think it's hard to how do you make a conversation that really goes deep into topics, and where people are really curious and listening to each other, and maybe in therapy, or maybe there are examples, of course, in society where we can achieve that. But I think it's interesting to see what can art contribute in terms of that. Can we, as artists, provide an idea of the conversation that can reach further than conversations do in real life, I guess.
Perhaps you could tell us a bit more about your research project, because I believe it is rooted in that notion of the conversation as a tool for theatrical staging. What do you conceive as research in your work? Is it the experimenting? Is it a way that you're dialoguing with social sciences or with theoretical sources, or I don't know what? Do you place your work in connection to other artworks? What do you conceive of research in your practice?
I mean, I've been enrolled in the doctoral studies program at Stockholm University of the Arts since 2017. I'm doing it part-time, and I'm about to do my disputation in 1 year. And the subject of my research is the staged conversation. So working with conversation as both the method and the form of as a way of treating documentary material for both theater and for film. So I mean this. And the practical research includes 2 works. It's The Raft, the film, and L'Aventure Invisible, the play. And I have also added, as a kind of documentation of my practice or my process, I will also make a book with my work diaries, because that's another tool that I'm using constantly next to this practice of collecting and sorting newspaper clips and stories and taking in that. I also have a diary, and which of course a lot of artists are having that, but this is a kind of conversation I'm having with myself, like about my work, and trying to understand what I'm doing, trying to like it's a kind of dialogue with myself in a sense. But I think in terms of research, I mean, in the program in Stockholm at the university is very much focused on the practical aspect of it. It invites artists that has a experimental practice from the beginning to spend 4 years within the academic platform or umbrella to provide this possibility to go deeper into your work that you're already doing, but also provide a kind of documentation and discussion with other researchers and artists around your work. So this university doesn't have this like a lot of other European universities have for artists, that there isn't this second leg, which is the theory. So we don't have to necessarily involve theory into the work. So it's more when it comes to putting your project in relation to other works, it's maybe more artistic work that I go into dialogue with. I mean, for example, I think I've been very inspired by documentary theater in France, for example. Since I moved here, I think the work of Émilie Rosset or Mohamed El Khatib, for example, are working are also trying to explore what can you do with reality on stage in different ways. So I think that there are other artists and practitioners that I'm interested in mirroring myself with, both in a French context, but of course also in Sweden and other countries.
Bonjour, j'avais une question sur le processus de travail, notamment au niveau de l'écriture. Je voulais savoir jusqu'où allait l'écriture de ce scénario, de ce script, à partir des entretiens que vous faites. Est-ce que c'est un processus qui est collectif ou personnel, et jusqu'où ça va? Qu'est-ce qui est donné à ceux qui sont sur scène? Est-ce que c'est quelque chose qui va jusqu'à un texte très précis, où il n'y a pas de part d'improvisation, voilà, jusqu'où va le travail d'écriture?
I mean, the technique with the earpieces, it really blocks all the possibilities for improvisation from the actors, so they are not able to improvise in a sense. So in that sense, when the script is fixed and locked, it stays exactly the same in terms of rhythm and in terms of exact phrasing of the lines. So it's very precise in the writing, even though the writing process takes the form of both actual writing from the transcripts of the interviews, where I start those 100 pages of interview transcripts, and then I add things, I rework things with my own words also, and rewrites things, and then we record with the voice actors, and then we change things in the rehearsals. So the writing continues, but within the editing or the montage of the sound. So I think the writing process there is, of course, when we are, as I'm now with the trilogy, when we have worked in French, I mean, Marianne Segol-Samoa is very key to my work. I mean, that's also why we have a company together. And so she is, a kind of co-creator in a sense, because she translates the text into French in several stages of the work, both before we go into the recording with the actors, but also in the rehearsals. Like when I want to rewrite a line or when I want to change things, it will be her who instantly makes a new translation, and we have a dialogue, of course, her and me, like about this development. So as a dramaturg, also she's very influential in that work. But it's not really. Actually, in the one case of the artist who's in L'Aventure Invisible, who's played by Frankie Gogo, there. We did, in the end of the rehearsals, find something that had to do with his life personally that I decided to include. So then I started to all of a sudden, in between rehearsals, interview him about his life and why he decided to take away his breasts and become something in between two genders and so on. So this part of the character came from the performer himself, in a sense, and mixed into the work.
Et sinon, est-ce qu'il n'y a pas eu un moment de l'idée de donner ce texte à apprendre sans passer par l'oreillette? Est-ce que c'est une étape qui a été envisagée ou tout de suite l'idée d'aller vers le travail à l'oreillette a été... Et donc, qu'est-ce qu'apporte ce travail à l'oreillette? Bien sûr, la mise à distance du texte, mais qu'est-ce que ça change entre le texte dit par un acteur et le texte redit par un acteur?
I think because I work also with non-professional actors mainly, it's really a technique that helps them, because it would be difficult for them to know how to learn the text and so on, because they're not trained for that, even though it would be possible, of course. But for me, I think it's about control. I think it makes me being the one deciding the final rhythm of the text and the intonations and how the phrases are being said, and not like in traditional theater, where actually as a director and a writer you have to at some point accept that it is not you who are transmitting the final work, it's an actor that will do it, and the actor will interpret or maybe change or maybe add rhythms or pauses. And I want to have that control the way I have in cinema. So it's for me it's a matter of control, I guess.
Alors, juste une dernière question. Il y a un grand cinéaste qui a travaillé beaucoup comme ça dans les années 60, c'est Jean-Luc Godard, qui a fait au moins 4 films, Vivre sa vie, et 2 ou 3 choses que je sais d'elle, et masculin-féminin avec la technique de l'oreillette.
Ah oui?
Oui. Et qui utilise beaucoup la technique de l'oreillette un petit peu dans ce sens-là, c'est-à-dire parce que c'est lui qui veut parler à travers les personnages, notamment les personnages joués par Jean-Pierre Léaud ou Anna Karina, donc il les fait parler à l'oreillette, et il est intéressé toujours par l'idée que ce qu'il leur dit à l'oreillette va être redit par eux avec une forme de distance. Bon, c'est quelque chose qui est très très visible dans 2 ou 3 choses que je sais d'elle avec Marina Vladi, qui dit le texte de Godard, mais on voit très bien qu'elle le dit, qu'elle ne le comprend pas forcément d'ailleurs, elle le dit. Et puis cette technique de l'oreillette va aussi avec quelque chose qui ressemble à ce que vous faites, c'est ce que moi j'appelle un peu la technique du ready-made chez Godard, c'est-à-dire qu'il fait venir des gens qui jouent leur propre, qui sont eux-mêmes. Donc par exemple dans Vivre sa vie, le moment où Godard travaille à l'oreillette avec Anna Karina, c'est quand elle rencontre Brice Parrain, le philosophe, et donc Godard lui dit ce qu'elle doit dire, et lui, qui est philosophe, joue son propre rôle, exactement comme...
lui, il joue sans oreillette. Le philosophe, il joue sans oreillette.
Non, oui, le philosophe, il joue sans oreillette, là, dans ce cas-là. Donc voilà, il y a cette idée de faire intervenir dans le film des gens qui jouent leur propre personnage, un petit peu comme la situation qui est celle au début de l'Aventure invisible. Sauf que là, vous partez sur l'idée que c'est un acteur qui joue un autre. Mais c'est comme si vous aviez demandé à la scientifique d'être présent sur scène, par exemple, à côté, d'une certaine manière, de l'acteur, de l'actrice qui joue le personnage.
But I think there is something strong. I mean, I've been with, how do you say, like taking the words of someone else, and there is something to be explored. I think also in how you perform that. I'm very fascinated, for example, by interpretation in terms of when in language also, when someone is being translated and the person is still present just next to that person. And I would like to see if that's something that I could explore. I didn't know that Godard had been using the oreillette. I'm fascinated by that. I would like to know more about that.
You have to see this film. Yes.
Of course, I will.
And also Bruno Dumont, as Eline pointed out yesterday, does that in Malut and probably other films. Perhaps that could be a time for questions. I think we have on a un autre micro. Un quatrième là.
Hej Marcus, tack så mycket. Thank you so much.
Någon som kan prata svenska var underbart. Suédois, super.
But I'm gonna ask my question in English, that might be better. Thank you so much for all that you talked about. This is really very interesting, so this might go all over the place. But at first, like in your introduction, you were talking about frustration of reality and then the desire to manipulate in your art. And so what I see and what I discover is that you have this will to really entrench your manipulation in reality by including the public in another mindset than just being the public and like watch a demonstration, but like take part in the process and listen to individuals that could be just like you and me, and like we're talking. And so it made me think about like once there was a theater teacher that told me you're too much into therapy. Like what you're doing is therapy. You're just because I was sitting with my réplique and we were just talking. I wanted it to be really real, and she was saying this is not the place of theater because this is too much into a psychological process, and you could do this in a group therapy. And so I wanted to have your mind on, to have your answer about this and what you picture yourself as, you know, far from creative process that is on the stage and like maybe music and maybe like actors that are professionals and etc. How do you perceive this? I don't know if this is clear at all, but.
But maybe this aspect of therapy, I mean, I think that's fascinating, and I think that what I do has a kind of therapeutic level. It resembles a little bit the therapeutic conversation. I think the group therapy in Wild Minds. I think it's never clearly said when the audience go into the circle of chairs. The chairs are empty. And so the performers are kind of hidden with the audience, and everyone sits down and the circle closes, and after a moment of silence, all of a sudden someone from the audience starts speaking, and you realize that, okay, the performers are with us, kind of. And I think it's never really clear. It's not like welcome to the, the Daydreamers Anonymous or something like that. It's not really said as a therapeutical situation, but I think that's the feeling that people get, that it resembles a group therapy situation or something like that. And I think for me also, there is this quality also in the raft when this group who knew each other in the past, when they come together, there is something therapeutic about it also, to be able to talk through what happened and even in Regretters, I think there it really had a therapeutical impact for the two men who had never shared their stories with someone else who also had the same experience. So I think that became very powerful dimension for them. It's maybe not the same impact, of course, for the audience, but But I mean, I'm very interested in how this can go together, I think, and I don't know if you've seen. I mean, there are other artists that are working. I saw now in HBO there's a new series called The Rehearsal. I don't know if anyone have seen it, but it's trying to like invite. It's kind of a reality show in a way, but with a very huge budget. So they would take on a real person's problem, and then they, for example, in the first episode, the real person is someone who is part of a how do you say it? Like a quiz night group, going to the same bar every Friday in Brooklyn with his friends and participating in quiz shows. But he had a problem because he had lied to one of his friends in the group many years earlier that he had a academic degree that he didn't have, and he wanted to come clean. So the TV show kind of helps him practice how to approach this friend group with the truth, and they have reconstructed the bar in the minutious detail inside a studio, and with staff and objects. It's really crazy. Like, so much money must have gone into this, and so he gets to like practice like as it's some kind of therapy, like luxury therapy, through this scene that he's gonna do for real, like to tell the truth to his friend, to kind of make sure he will do it the right way and so on. So I think, I mean, there is this aspect of a lot of of documentary work that is curious about this.
I think it's interesting because it connects to the raft in a way, the way that we talked about that with Viviana, the raft as the initial experiment, looking a lot like what a reality TV show would be like today, with a sort of mastermind who tries to create conflicts between the characters in a closed space and fuel their rivalries and violence and their sex relationships, etc. So are you interested in that sort of reality TV format? And I had a more general question about your connection to pop culture, media culture, because also tabloid culture, la presse à sensation, reality TV, and also perhaps television series. Are you interested in that universe, and how do you sort of dialogue with it?
Maybe in my maybe not pop culture so much, but certainly the sensationalist press somehow. I mean, I worked, even as a teenager, I worked at the biggest tabloid newspaper in Sweden, and I was already very fascinated in a sense with these kind of stories that had that those kind of dimensions. But I was at the same time, as a journalist back then in this field, very frustrated also because, of course, it is very cynical, and the work of tabloid journalism. So, but I think that the spotlight or the compass used by tabloid journalism is very interesting, in fact, because it usually finds stories that speak to, on a very essential level, to something within us, something that can trouble us or something that can provoke us. But if you take it out of this kind of sensationalist context and puts it in the other format, like radio or a documentary film or a theater play, you can reach something else, I think, with it, and almost like you treat it as modern mythology or something like that. And that, I think, is fascinating. What was that?
Yeah, just the raft. Why did you choose to have the voiceover said by the anthropologist who did the experiment? Because it creates a very disquieting feeling for the spectator to have to identify with that voice.
I think for the raft, it was one of the things. I mean, in a sense, I kind of realized that I was doing a similar journey as the scientist. I mean, in the beginning of the process, I felt that the scientist. Now maybe most of you haven't seen this film, but basically the crew that I reunite, they are all agreeing with each other that it was the scientist himself that was the big problem on board, and the big conflict that happened wasn't between them; it was between them as a group and him. So for me, it posed some problems. How do I play with conflict when there is nothing conflictuous between the characters in my studio. So I realized I needed the voice of Santiago, the scientist, in the film somehow to be able to create that kind of conflict to the film, and that's how I chose to have an actor come and interpret him and so on.
Other questions?
Bonjour, merci pour cette présentation. Je trouve ça intéressant justement pour rebondir sur la question précédente. Alors du coup, moi je suis en doctorat en SACRe et en plus ce qui est particulier parce que vous posez la question de la thérapie, je sais que je suis pédopsychiatre de formation et je m'intéresse justement à l'utilisation de ce type de dispositif aussi dans la question du soin et ce qu'on peut appeler la métacognition, la capacité à penser sur soi et ce qui se joue. Et justement, pour répondre à la remarque que tu faisais, il y a quelque chose qui se passe, et peut-être la différence éventuellement de Godard, c'est que vous rééditez le son sur un montage son, ce qui crée aussi un raccourci sur ces temps de pause, qui sont pourtant très importants pour avoir eu l'occasion d'éditer. Comme ça, on peut un peu dans cette dynamique de vouloir raccourcir, et on le voit dans ce qui se passe, c'est-à-dire ça rebondit très très vite sur les questions. Et ça crée une étrangeté qui participe, en fait, je trouve, de la mise à distance. Et je voudrais savoir, parce que parfois c'est des heureux hasards, et parfois c'est volontaire, et j'imagine que ça se construit en tant que jeune créatif. Je ne sais pas trop comment ça va s'incarner pour moi, mais je trouve qu'il y a quelque chose d'assez intéressant, à la fois en reprenant ce dispositif que vous appelez Black Studio, je crois, et ce dispositif aussi du son qui est comme ça, raccourci, où on sent qu'il n'y a pas les respirations forcément. Je voudrais savoir déjà si c'est volontaire, ou enfin, comment ça s'est construit dans votre démarche.
If I understood it right now, but I think when you see the excerpts now, maybe they are not representational, but it's of course, because you say that there's a lack of pause, like that's right, there's a density to the conversation, and I think it's I mean, in the plays, there are pauses, but there are pauses like with music and like little intermissions where there is like film or images and music to create a kind of dynamic to let the audience breathe in between. Because of course the conversation, I can't cut away from it really. Like when it started, it goes on. So it's hard to like find the moments to create those poses. But maybe the of course now it doesn't show the dynamic of the longer experience of seeing the play. But I'm not sure if that is exactly how you, because you wanted to say something about like sound and poses and maybe connected to therapy somehow.
Quand vous interagissez avec quelqu'un que vous êtes en train de découvrir, ce que suppose reproduire la conversation, les questions ne peuvent pas fuser comme ça. Par exemple, il va y avoir ces incompréhensions ou ces demandes de réexplication, ce temps où on s'arrête, où on a besoin d'ailleurs du visage de l'interlocuteur, comme maintenant, où je vous vois essayer de me comprendre. Et ça c'est justement un peu effacé par...
I mean, of course, I mean, I am making something much more efficace. Like it's something that is a work of like trying to find a musicality and an efficiency that is not present also in a normal conversation, like the one we're having now, where now it's also translation, where I maybe misinterpret you and then we have to re-explain and things like this. But of course, this I cut out. It's a way of like sculpting the perfect dialogue in a sense where you're really trying to make a journey through the dialogue for the audience, a journey of curiosity in a way where I make sure that the attention is there very strongly all the time. So the way I distribute my original questions and make the answers and try to shape the dialogue makes you as an audience go very fluently through the experience in a sense. So I think, I mean, it looks very simple, like as a proposal artistically, but I think in the writing and in the mise en scène and the casting, it's very delicate and a lot of detail and a lot of work into making that simplicity in a sense. Right. I don't know if that answers it.
Thank you, Marcus, for your talk. I tried in English. You, as let's say, experimental practitioner, you are experimenting a lot of setups. You showed quite a lot of them. And my question is, how do these setups produce new knowledge? I don't know. For example, you have them after this traditional setup, like public and audience. You mix them all up, and the ultimate setup would be that everybody is completely mixed. So you showed some photos like this one or others where only the actors are on stage, and then you have the other scenario where you have everybody on stage. So you, not as a director, let's say a spectator of your own play, what does it really change if you have the audience with or without
that's interesting. I mean, it's yes, the excerpts now have been captured during a rehearsal moment when the audience is not there. And I think it changes really a lot, because I think one thing that is strong with the experience of this situation of the circle is that everyone is visible. You can't hide as an audience, so you're being exposed to the look of others, and you are looking at the other people. So I think that helps. It creates something interesting, I think, because you can look at the performers, but you can also look at the others and see what are they kind of experiencing. Are they very into the story? Are they following? Are they reacting? And you're mirroring yourself. So I think this is interesting as a situation where I lack sometimes in theater. Also, you have the feeling that you're with people, you're experiencing something together, but you're not really seeing the reactions of the others. And this is really present, I think, here, where the stage is gone in a sense, and the stage is in a way the audience, and the performers are more integrated there too. So I think it also puts not only the conversation, the talking in focus, but also the listening and the receiving of other people's stories. So I think that is, a humbling activity, which I lack a little bit sometimes in the public realm, which is very driven by politics, and the public debate is very driven by conflicts and by opposition, and you want to position yourself against others, where I think what I'm looking for is not really conflict, it's more kind of curiosity instead, where people are really trying to just listen and understand what the other person is experiencing, and how that might be different or maybe similar to your own. So this, I think, is, as a dramatic proposal, it's quite different from how we learn, or how I learned in theater school, that where you learn that drama should be driven by conflict, and I'm doing something that is quite far from that in a sense.
Hi. Thank you so much for your generosity, your sensibility. So I have two maybe question. I'm gonna start first in English, because I work on my question, so I'm gonna read it. But after I should switch in France, because I want to ask something about Godard and Nana with the philosopher. I know this part by heart, and so I have to just say it in French just to do a comment with your work, because I think about Godard too when I see Orlando and Michael last night. Yeah. So I don't know if you know, but they are a philosopher, a Belgian philosopher and psychanalyst, and it's his name is Vinciane Desprez, yeah. And so she received the Moran Prize in 2021 from the Académie Française. And this prize is awarded to an author or a book's work that promote a new ethics. And so I think this is very interesting, because Vinciane, at the beginning, she asked for people, and she tried to do some kind of transcription of the story of that people, like former people, people who have some connection with the dead people and how they live with them, and scientists who work on animals and how they ask questions to animals, etc. So at the first part on this, work, she do some kind of transcription. And at one moment, she has to write things. And she noticed that there are a real difference between do a transcription and write something. Because she say, we need new stories, but it's very important to take care of which stories that you want to tell and in what way. And she was saying at the first time when she do transcription, she write very fast because that take time. She do a lot of research, etc. But when she know what to write, she write like straight down 1 month and that it's. But when she write the transcription, but when she has to write something, create a story, she was saying that it was very difficult because she wanted to say something and all the time she was stopped because that wasn't the right way to say it, to be revealing about the people or the story. So that take time, more time. And so she do a differences between that, and I want to ask you the same things because from Orlando and Michael, it's kind of transcription, even if I know it's more complicated than that, but it's kind of transcription because it's a real dialogue. But after the 2 second piece play, it's like more, I think, like writing. So I want to know for you what is the difference between transcription and writing, and what the way to write can add you something. And I really like the way that you choose a non-professional actor, because they are non-professional, but they share something with the character that they have to play. And I think that link the non-actor, not professional actor, to the real character, and that share a strong empathy, which we can feel in the play as a public. And for me, I'm very sensitive. I'm very glad to just see something so generous and so sensible, because you speak about the dialogue, and for you take care of dialogue which is not conflict or opposition, but just take care listening to each other. And it's not one people who ask question, everybody ask question, so there's kind of non-hierarchy on the character. And so all that kind of way of think, I think, participated of the kind of right of kind of story that you want to tell and that you want to show. And it's something more than to show identity that we are not used to see. So sorry, it's very long. It's the first
Perhaps
part.
we can just answer the first part, and then you ask about Godard.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, that's nice to hear that it worked like that for you yesterday. That you made this link between the interpreted like personal experience of the actors or the performers on stage and the story. But I think in terms of like, for me with transcription is really I identify with this, that the Belgian writer or philosopher.
Després.
What's her name?
Vinciane Després.
Vinciane, yeah. What Vinciane has said, that like there is like, of course there is a responsibility and ethics that comes into taking care of someone else's words, and I'm trying to be very truthful to in the beginning to what has been really said, and then I start sometimes even when I transcribe, like when I'm listening and writing, I get an impulse like, but here I would like her to go a little bit further here, and I stop and I make the very technically, like in my Word document, I change to italics. So then I start in italics to fabulate, so that I can distinguish later what is my edition, what is her, because otherwise it will be blurry for me later. Because in the process, in the end, I don't make this distinction. But in the process, it's important for me to know, but also for myself, but also for the person I interviewed. For example, I mean, when it came to, I can show you an example of how this is a negotiation. I mean, when I use someone's story, like the story of Sarah Pusil, for example, who's the artist who have worked with Claude Cahun, I approach her and say, I want to interview you. I want to make this interview be part of a play. I want a performer to perform your words. But I'm also gonna maybe add things as a writer. So I will partly fictionalize your story. And I don't know how yet. But do you trust me? Or, I have to build a trust because that's... and what I do is I offer a way out for them, or I offer an opportunity for them that they can, in the end, if they don't feel comfortable with my changes, they can opt out. And I just say that it's a fictional character, or it's a fictional character based partly on interviews with Sarah Pusil, or we use, in the end, maybe she accepts that it's okay, you can use it. But this is constant negotiation between me and her. And I, for example, I just show a clip where from one of our Zoom conversations during the interviewing time, Sarah Pusil is wondering a little bit how she will be fictionalized.
Do you want to talk to me about this fiction element, about the fictional details, or do you feel it's better to not tell me at this point and wait?
Yeah,
do
maybe.
You want to share that? What do you think?
I think I would like to wait a little bit because
is
right
she
now
a murderess?
No, I don't. I mean,
is she bonkers? Because that's not fiction already.
No, but I think I would like to try to see. No, it's not so bad. I think I'm trying to see how can I push like the obsession with Claude Cahun more. Like what would happen if the character of the artist would not only go to the archive and study the material. What happens if the artist hides in the archive and spends the night there in secret? And it's things
taking
like
it
this
more
to
extreme in a sense. Yeah.
Exactly. And of course that's pushing it.
It's about passion in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
It's about being passionate.
Yeah, totally.
So we monitor it to sort of whatever, but actually these passionate things do happen. I have had periods at times where not with Cahun, but with other characters, where I felt like I just want to be that person. If only I could be that person, I'd be so happy. I'd be free.
What persons could that be?
Okay, I'll tell you what they are. It's totally bonkers. But it's a very strong feeling of just like...
I'll just show you. So in the negotiations with the original person, like this is an example of, I tried to explain that I want to push things maybe a little bit more extreme. And in this case, I think Sarah was very open. She was herself an artist. I think she she could understand that there could be room for some experimentation and some pushing. And here, even when we negotiate, something else can come. I mean, now she starts to talk about how she feels passionate about impersonating other people. So all of a sudden it becomes like a new interview where it could add things to the material. So this negotiation about the ethics of how to interpret someone else can also all of a sudden generate new material. I would like to say another example that is maybe, it's of how this negotiation can happen. It's one of the characters in Regretters, or in Orlando, who is in the red suit to the right. He made his transition into being a woman in 1967. It was one of the first cases of gender transitions in Sweden. And his doctors advised him not to tell anyone that he had actually been born a man, and to continue his life now as if he had always been a woman. So when he, after the operations a few months after, met a man and fell in love and started a relationship, and he didn't say anything. And he married this man, and he was married with this man for 11 years before the truth was unveiled, and in a very dramatic way. And in the final parts of the film and also the final parts of the play, this has a big focus in the text, where Orlando tells Mikael about the experience of how his marriage ended and how the truth finally came out. And when I was working with the interviews, with the process, because before I let them meet in the studio, I of course interviewed them one-on-one to know what kind of stories they had. And every time I asked Orlando about how his marriage ended, like what happened, can you tell me the situation when your husband got to know the truth and so on. It was very difficult for him, and he answered different every time. So I felt that it was a traumatic experience, and he couldn't really formulate, maybe he had suppressed the memory, or he couldn't really formulate like one scene where this was happened. And I needed this to be a scene for the comprehension and for the efficiency of the play, or even of the film. So I said, do you mind if I write this scene for you based on the different things that you've told me? And so he said yes, and I wrote something. And he read it during the process. Like, I wrote an afternoon where the secret was unveiled and what happened. And he said, when he read it, he said, yeah, it could have been like that. So he kind of accepted it, and then he interprets that text into the film. And many years later, after the film was released, Orlando was invited as a guest on a big TV show in Sweden, and I watched the program. And the TV host asks him the same question I had been asking him, like, what happened with your marriage? How was the secret unveiled? When did your husband find out that you were not actually a real woman, you had been born a man, and so on, and what consequences it had? And I heard him in the TV basically use my story as the way I had written it, as if it was his own. So in a sense, my slightly fictionalization of this moment of his life had several years later kind of integrated into his real narrative of his own story. So I just say those two examples to show you a little bit how this.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, it's. I think the way that you do it, it's really show us as how fiction is a part of the reality. All the time we are in fiction, and for example in Orlando and Mikael, when they are showing some archive photography during the play, they are like, oh, you seem really like a woman, nobody can trust that you be a man, and so you seem real, you seem very truth as a woman, and the question of integrity, sincerity, like to play and to be a very good character, like it's very interesting too, because it's about gender transition, but we play a character even if you don't do a changing character. So I'm going to do a transition for the second question. So it's about Godard, and when the movie is Vivre sa vie, and I am going to switch in France. And le passage, c'est Nana Nana et le philosophe. Le titre, c'est Nana fait de la philosophie sans le savoir. Bon. Dans ce passage, Nana dit mais pourquoi est-ce qu'il faut toujours parler? Et elle dit parce que plus on parle et plus les mots ne veulent rien dire. Et elle dit est-ce que les mots nous trahissent? Et elle dit aussi mais l'art de parler, c'est mortel. Et alors je m'arrête juste là. L'art de parler, c'est mortel. Je trouve ça très intéressant parce que les acteurs qui savent parler, peut-être tuent quelque chose. Et c'est pour ça que moi j'ai pensé à Godard et de ce passage, parce que l'art de parler, c'est mortel. Et là, vous nous faites voir des personnes qui ne savent pas parler, mais qui du coup rendent le discours vivant. C'est le premier point. Ensuite, elle dit... bon, il parle beaucoup, c'est magnifique, je vous invite à voir ce film et ce passage. Mais je me souviens qu'elle dit, le philosophe lui répond, on ne peut bien parler que lorsque l'on regarde la vie avec détachement. Et donc ce rapport de mettre une distance qui nous permet de mieux dire, aussi ce travail que vous faites avec, comme disait Barbara, la bonne distance, peut-être c'est là la manière de mieux dire, plutôt que de se taire, parce que Nana aimerait se taire et vivre en silence, mais bon, il faut bien parler. Ah yeah, sorry. Yeah, Nana want to just stop speaking, but the philosophers say maybe we can speak well when we take some distance with life. And so after, Nana say, yeah, but when you speak, you risk to mentir. You risk speak is a risk to lie. Parler, c'est risquer de mentir. And the philosopher answer, yeah, because the lie is a way to the research. So oui, parce que le mensonge, c'est un moyen de la recherche. Le mensonge, c'est un moyen de la recherche. And I think that sentences, le mensonge est un moyen de la recherche, it's very interesting because it's a really theatralistic question, because the theater is like, what is a lie, what is a reality, and all the time it's mixed together, and you, in that way you lie, but it's a lie to say something real. So it's all time, and I think you do it in very, very, very vraiment d'une manière magnifique, in very perfect and precise way. So yeah, thank you so much for your work.
Thank you for giving me this inspiring this reference, because I mean I think I will have to use this for my research project for sure. That that lying is in fact a possible way of making research, and no, but that's very interesting, and I think. Because of course, it's when I started out as a journalist to have made this trajectory into a profession that deals in a sense with fiction, like theater specifically does. Obviously, it hasn't always been easy for me, because I feel that the lying part has been, or the manipulating part has been kind of. I haven't always been proud of that. I want things to be like exactly like it is, or it's and I feel like sometimes I get questioned also, like, why do you need to lie, why do you need to add, and so on. So maybe this can be an interesting way of thinking about it in a philosophical way, actually, like, and not in a ethical way in terms of I don't know, ethics around documentary journalistic practices or something like that, like how to treat sources, but actually approaching it from the realms of philosophy rather. Super interesting. I would like to discuss that more, and I would definitely see the Godard film.
Il y a 3 films à voir. Hein. Ah oui, c'est un corpus de 3 films, puisqu'il y a Vivre sa vie, masculin, féminin, et 2 ou 3 choses que je sais d'elle, où vraiment le travail à l'oreillette est au cœur du travail de Godard à ce moment-là. Ouais.
Ouais, super. I will watch them all.
Merci Célia. D'autres questions?
Merci beaucoup. C'est un peu en lien avec les remarques précédentes, donc j'en profite. Je voulais juste savoir, parce que vous parlez beaucoup de manipulation et de négociation dans l'introduction de la fiction dans la réalité, mais est-ce qu'il y a pas aussi est-ce que vous posez la question aussi du consentement et de la possibilité d'avoir quelque chose d'assez voyeuriste aussi dans cette exposition de la réalité, avec aussi cette forme du théâtre clinique, un peu d'observation clinique des choses, et est-ce que ça vous paraît délicat, et en particulier dans les questions de genre qui sont très sensibles en ce moment? Est-ce que vous y réfléchissez aussi?
If I understood it right, I mean, I think that voyeurism is part of, I mean, a lot of artists practice, but especially, I mean, I feel very like somehow I feel like a voyeur in a sense, like when I do my like practice of sorting through newspaper clips, trying to see and also making art the excuse for posing questions to people, to have art as an excuse for being curious and to ask the questions that maybe you wouldn't otherwise dare to ask other people. So in a sense, of course, I think there is voyeurism here, and I think in the I haven't really thought so much about, but that's right. Of course, I mean there is voyeurism in terms of like the disposition, like you are in the clinical way that the scenography is presented, and maybe the connection also to the anatomic theater and. I just didn't make the connection between that and the voyeurism that could be connected to the tabloid stories and these kind of things. It's interesting, I think. But I think voyeurism is interesting, I think. But of course, in the right packaging, and maybe this is a way of packaging it, not with the big, colorful headlines, not with the big. Not with screaming out loud like what the tabloid press is doing, but doing something much more delicate in try to explore that, the realm of of voyeurism.
Just perhaps a quick follow-up on the issue of because Orlando and Michael is a sort of new version of a 2006 film and of the first version of the play. And throughout the time, between 2006 and today, perceptions of gender issues and trans identity have evolved massively. And also between the generations of Orlando in the 60s, Michael in the 1990s, and the years 2000s, and now 2000. Sorry, these perceptions of issues have changed a lot. And of course, today transgender figures are much more prominent in our culture, even in mainstream culture. Recently, how did you negotiate with that evolving story and that context in the creation of this new version of the play?
I mean, for what, that's really true. I mean, for me, I think I thought it was interesting to return to the material and look at it now, like almost 15 years later. Because, as you say, so much has happened when it comes to gender identity and the way we are speaking about it. And of course, it posed some questions to how do we frame this conversation, because it is a conversation that happened in 2006 between already two men who represents generations even earlier. So it's a kind of window into the past. And how we used to talk about gender and I. So this was important, I think, to really frame that, and that's very clearly stated in the beginning of the play, that this conversation is based on a conversation that happened in 2006. So we have also kept all the terminology that they originally had, some of it being not very politically correct in today's culture, like how we are speaking about these issues. And for example, I think it's interesting to see also how much language has changed. For example, like the term non-binary, that it didn't exist in 2006. So Orlando, for example, when he describes himself as identifying somewhere between the two sexes, like he's not a man, not a woman, he's something in between or both at the same time. He maybe if he would have been alive today, he would have identified as non-binary, but this option wasn't existing for him. So he's kind of trapped in the language of his time, and that is, I think, it's interesting, and hopefully this conversation from the past can inform us about our recent history.
And connected to that, I had a curiosity question. Are you familiar with the work of Sebastian Lifshitz? Not only his film, but also his photograph collections and his work on the history of the transgender community, and his films Bambi and recently Petite Fille, who had a huge audience when it was broadcast on Arte. So is that a work that you are connecting with, or
It's something I learned about his work now, actually, recently, after I moved to France. So I wasn't aware of his work back then, and I haven't really followed his work before. But yeah, surely I need to see Bambi for sure.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask you a question about the public. And it's two questions. First is like we've been a lot talking about your writing process, your research process, and I want to ask you about, let's say, the consequences of your production in terms of public, because you said you are coming from journalism, so journalism has a certain type of audience, and theater has another one, and the topic you address is really important, has a lot of political consequences. And so my question is, there are two of them, is do you expect actually by doing this piece to have some impact on social transformation on the society? And do you think the theater form is the right one, considering your expectations? And then a second question that may be related, maybe, is which place or which role do you want from the public? Because in your piece, I see the public as someone sitting as we are, or, I mean, just sitting around and watching at what's happening. And maybe because it's very intimate, it would be easy to transform a bit or to imagine kind of interaction between the public and the people. But I imagine it's pretty hard because of the process of writing and like not transforming possible answers from the characters. But like, so my two questions may be related or not, but I would like to hear about it.
But if the first question there about the expectations of how the theater work is being perceived, possibly politically or not, but is that concerning like theater work in general, or you mean Orlando and Michael in specific, or no? In general. Or in your work, do you expect some social, political? No, I think. No, I think I don't identify as an artist like an activist artist or a political artist. I think I'm someone who's more interested in like existential issues, philosophical issues, something that has to do with things on a more personal level. But of course, the theme of identity and who we are, even though my way of approaching it is much more on the personal level, like searching of understanding who we are and so on. But of course, identity is also a political issue in terms of how we are who we are allowed to be in society. But I'm not really like, it's not this dilemma that I'm putting like in focus. I think, of course, it's there because you have to, when you, as a person, you have to negotiate your position in society always. So it's part of the stories, but it's not really my agenda. It's not, I'm not considering myself as a political activist in a sense. But then the second question, I think because this format of the circle, it does provide a possibility, you could think, for interaction that is maybe a lost option that I'm not letting happen because I'm too much of a control freak or something. Because I think that it could be a platform where this could be integrated, where you could actually put stop to the sound script and let the audience in and see what would happen. That could be interesting, but I would be afraid because it would, like, in my feeling of like wanting to control the rhythm and the flow and the experience, like I mean, anything could happen. So it could also be embarrassing, or it could be, so I would be scared of that. But often after, especially Wild Minds with the circle of chairs, a lot of people come up and say that they had this feeling that they could have said something. But it has never happened that an audience member has started to speak. And I think it's because it's clear when you sit in the situation. I mean, the performers are wearing microphones, there is music coming, and I mean, you feel that there is like something, that has been prepared. It's not just happening in the moment. It's like something that is on a track. So you feel that you can't really interact. But it would be interesting to see like what would happen. I've even played with the idea that what would happen if I take out the performers and just give the oreillettes to the audience members, and let them just go in a sense. And but I haven't dared to try this yet.
Thank you. I saw a piece in Pompidou not so long ago, and actually there were no actors in. Like we were the actors, and they gave us some text in like a letter something, and so there was a voice like asking questions, and some people were helping us like to find that we have the right text at the right moment.
But I saw this play. It was Rimini Protocol.
Yeah, Rimini Protocol, exactly. And I think that Rimini Protocol could be very interesting in the way you do something.
Yeah, this was an interesting piece for sure, where there was no actors and the audience, they had to come up. And I think they even used the oreillette. Yeah, completely.
À ce propos, donc, on aura une rencontre sacre avec Stéphane Caegui de Rimini Protocol le 3 février. Une rencontre qui se passera, on ne sait pas encore où, mais voilà, donc je rebondis sur cette référence. Encore des questions?
I'm curious to know just how it was for the actors to work with the earpods, the oreillettes. Were they confused? And why did you choose to record the sound instead of, I don't know, having someone just speaking for the actors? Why did you choose like this very...
You mean speaking live, like someone being hiding off stage?
Yes, live, exactly. Because it's a more radiophonic way to do, so it's interesting, but I'm really wondering why you did that.
I think it is because of my background as a radio journalist that it's a way of controlling the rhythm and to make the montage and to have this to be able to control that. But it's interesting to see what would happen if you would do it live. I'm curious to know actually Godard if he was like speaking live into the earpiece of his actress or if it was on a recorded thing. Maybe
non, c'est du live.
Ah ouais, okay, c'est du live. Yeah. Okay, so he was like hiding it, like ask this. Okay. I think that could really be wonderful and to try that. But for me, I think it's a compositional choice. It's my aesthetics. I think it's my way of wanting to control the musicality of the dialogue, and that's more important to me than whatever it would give that might also be interesting in terms of like the present. Like that something is really happening live and it's scary and so on. But actors are reacting differently, I think, depending on if they have acting experience or not. And that's why we are doing a lot of castings, so where people get to try the technique, because it's not everyone who feels comfortable with it. So that's why we do that with the non-professionals. But when I've been working in the National Theatre in Sweden, for example, with professional actors from their ensemble, with the technique, there was a lot of skepticism. They felt that I took something away from them, as they are also artists, and they felt that I was stealing space from their practice. So there was a lot of like resistance in the beginning, and then I think it changed, because a lot of them who were skeptic, they felt very liberated actually by and realizing that it didn't take away something. It was just a different way of working, instead of maybe using techniques from Stanislavski of the ideas of like working from the inside and out with your own history, your own, I don't know, material and psychological material, and then finding an output. This is working the other way, like from the outside and in, and it's just another proposition, but it's still an actor's work to embody that. So I think it was liberating, because they got rid of their own how do you say, manière, like their rhythms, their kind of traps, where they feel that they always maybe do certain things to maybe remember the lines, or they have certain rhythm of the language, and here they need to speak like the rhythm of someone else. So this also creates other body language, other movement, other intonations. So I think they felt it was interesting, even from a professional perspective.
But if I understand correctly, I'm speaking in English now. If I understand correctly, you don't want the actors, these people, to act.
Yeah.
You don't want them to play. So the drama has already taken place, and you just want them to speak these words.
But of course,
right?
Yes. But of course, acting is very abstract in a sense. What is acting? And of course, acting is something that happens with the actual body and person and of the performer, even if this person is trained or not, and meeting the material, even if the material is learned by heart or being fed through headphones. And so I think in this level of acting, what is still happening, of course, there is some kind of composition that is happening, but I try to avoid the very broad traps that can come, I think, when you work with learned text and learned material that I'm not so interested in terms of like preparing actors psychologically and so on. But saying that, I mean, of course, we have those moments when we work with the professional actors with the sound script. Then we talk about psychology and these kind of things, and intonation and meaning and why and like subtext and these kind of things.
But in the case of Orlando and Mikael, I'm wondering why did you not choose the sound of the film?
But this is a very technical. Here it's like, I mean, here it's a language thing because they speak in Swedish in the film and it's French here.
Right.
But it's an adequate question because the first film was in Swedish, so you could have imagined that maybe they could have. I don't know, like I could have first interviewed them and then giving them headphones to kind of repeat some of their own things. But no, that doesn't really work because it's themselves in the film and So that would.
Dernière question. Oui, Pierre.
Attends.
Je vais pas avoir le courage de le faire en anglais. Je me posais la question, est-ce que vous avez essayé de documenter le vécu des acteurs justement autour de cette forme précise, et justement est-ce que vous avez essayé de récolter leurs témoignages sur ce que ça fait d'être à la fois aussi dirigé de manière aussi forte et à la fois de la résonance qu'il peut y avoir avec leur propre histoire, parce que c'est quelque chose qui revient souvent dans le discours.
I mean, in general, you mean en général, in the practice, or Orlando Mikael in specific? In general, yeah, because I think I haven't, in terms of research, it would be an interesting thing to do, to really ask both the like professional and non-professional actors, how is it to use this technique? What does it give for them? And there has been some, in England, for example, the technique has been used for maybe 15, 20 years by several theater companies. And there I know that there has been a lot of like academic writing also about like how it is to interpret someone else's voice and how does it change the practice of acting and so on.
Perhaps not, if I understand correctly, perhaps not just the technique, but also to play a character that is close to them in a way that has common points with them. So to document the actors that we saw yesterday, how it affects them to have these characters.
I mean, I haven't done that in a way that would be kind of make it part of my research or something like that. But for example, when we were doing the Orlando Mikael, as we are working with two performers on stage that have not this experience of regretting the transition, but having either experience of transitioning or having a experience of living a life like as a queer person, like in an androgynous presentation of yourself. I mean, there was, of course, the possibility, maybe this could be another layer. Could we use this as a kind of, I don't know, an outro for the play, an intro for the play, something in the middle where they actually comment on what they are interpreting and see, and we, as part of the play. But in the end, we decided not to do that. But it could have been interesting in terms of artistic research to collect those testimonies, for sure.
Yeah, I just want to. I don't know if you know her, but there are a French filmmaker which name is Céline Sciamma, and yeah, she is as the same as you. She's not focused on the emotional situation of an actor. She always says that she wants to just be focused of the present of the character and what they go through, and I think that way to create a character is very interesting, because that lets the character be more free to just be and not to be like a kind of caricature of what they think they have to be if they come from that situation or if they are. So they are more like a character with a complexity. And I really like that in your work too, because your characters are very complex, because there are a lot of paradox inside of there, and there are no problem with that, because that makes them just human. And I really like the way that you play with as Céline in another way. There are an abstraction and kind of real fact, because we are in a real situation. We are some archive document and etc. documentation, but the place is like could be everywhere or nowhere, and we don't know where they come from, and we don't know where they go, and that let the public like imagine something. So character can be very complex because they are able to be, because they are not linked to kind of caricature, but they are complex because we can imagine what part that you don't have, and it's very interesting, I think, for me, that character just be there. It's like kind of fragmented representation that lets more freedom to the character and to the public. So yeah, thank you for work. I really like it. So thank you.
Well, thank you. No, but that's interesting with terms of searching for complexity. I think because that's when also a trap. I think in fiction making, when you're creating narratives and you have these like ideas that you need to make characters become very clear about like what they represent and how they position themselves, so that it would be more easily understandable for make a scenario. Or I mean, and this I think is it's a little bit of a trap, this puzzle of trying to create the perfect script, you know, and all these things that is maybe more present in the cinema field than in the theater. But and I think in that case, I think it's very, for me, it's always inspiring to start off with the reality, in fact, because reality is often more complex than what your imagination can provide. So if you just are open to embrace the complexity, it's there in reality, I think. And no, that's an interesting reflection, I think.
Ben merci, je crois qu'on va encore remercier Marcus Lindeen pour cette très belle rencontre. Merci beaucoup.
Merci à vous.
Merci Marcus. Merci aussi Viviana Chiotini pour avoir accepté de participer à cet échange. Et merci à vous tous de votre présence et de votre attention.
Et je voulais juste dire que les 3 spectacles sont encore donnés. Vous pouvez toujours les voir jusqu'à lundi. Orlando et Michael, Wild Minds et l'Aventure Invisible ce soir, demain, dimanche et lundi.
Oui, tout à fait.
Au théâtre de Gennevilliers.
Ouais. Et je crois que c'est plus facile si vous ne trouvez pas de billets sur le site Festival d'automne. Il y a aussi quelques places directement sur le théâtre, la site de théâtre.
Oui, on s'aperçoit qu'au Festival d'automne, il dit souvent qu'il n'y a plus de place sur le site, alors qu'en fait, il reste des places. Donc, voilà, je vous engage à aller au théâtre de Gennevilliers.